Open on Lorraine Mosby standing in front of a building no one has entered in 22 years. She is 63 years old. Her checking account has $211 in it. She is wearing the same black dress she wore to her husband's funeral 4 days ago, and in the right pocket of her wool coat are his reading glasses, tortoise-shell frames. Left lens cracked from the time he dropped them reaching for the truck's glove box. They are the only thing of his she managed to take before the locks changed. The building is a bakery, or it was. The awning has collapsed on one side. The plate glass window is clouded with calcium deposits, and the hand-painted sign above the door has faded to a color between rust and nothing. It reads, Mosby's, though the apostrophe flaked away years ago, and the S is more suggestion than letter. Her husband bought it for $1 at a county tax auction in 2001. Correction. Her husband bought it. She did not know that until 3 days ago. The October wind off the river smells like mud and dead leaves. The key in her hand is small, brass, and warm from her grip. She has been holding it for several minutes, standing on the sidewalk of a town that has mostly forgotten this building exists. The key turns. The door opens. What is inside will take her 3 weeks to understand. Because behind the counter, behind the ovens, behind the walk-in freezer that has not hummed since 1999, Earl Mosby hid 25 years of a plan his wife never knew about. He hid it in flour tins and recipe cards, and a sealed space behind the bricks of a bread oven. He hid it in a cassette tape that still has his voice on it, recorded the Tuesday after he was told he had 7 months to live. She will find all of it, not at once. That is not how Earl built it. She will find it the way he left it, one piece at a time, each piece leading to the next, each one saying the same thing in a different way. But before any of that, before the flour tin, before the bonds, before the tape, there was the afternoon she came home from burying her husband and found the locks on her own front door had been changed, and her nephew-in-law's car in the driveway, and a piece of paper taped to the storm door that said the house was no longer hers. That is where this starts. 4 days before she stood in front of that bakery, Lorraine Mosby buried the only man who ever remembered how she took her coffee. Earl Mosby died on a Wednesday in late October, in the bedroom of the house on Elm Ridge Road, where he and Lorraine had lived for 34 years. Pancreatic cancer. He was 67. The hospice nurse closed his eyes at 4:12 in the afternoon, and Lorraine sat in the chair beside the bed for an hour and 14 minutes, without moving, holding his reading glasses because they had been on the nightstand, and her hand needed something to do. The funeral was Friday. It rained. That flat grey Ohio rain that does not fall so much as hang in the air. 41 people came to the service. Earl's nephew Vernon was among them. He sat in the third pew in a charcoal suit, and he left before the reception. Lorraine did not notice, because she was standing beside a folding table in the church basement, accepting casseroles from women whose names she could barely keep straight through the fog of 72 sleepless hours. Someone pressed a warm dish into her hands. Someone else squeezed her shoulder. She could not feel the shoulder. She could feel the casserole dish. Warmth travels differently through ceramic than through skin. She got home at 3:40 in the afternoon. The locksmith's van was in the driveway. A man she did not recognize was kneeling at her front door with a drill. The sound was high-pitched and mechanical, the whine of a bit boring through old wood, and it cut across the yard like something tearing. Vernon was standing behind the locksmith, arms crossed, phone in his hand. Taped to the storm door was a single sheet of paper, a quitclaim deed, dated 6 weeks earlier, with Earl's signature at the bottom. It transferred the house to Vernon Mosby. Sole consideration, $1. Vernon spoke without raising his voice. The cruelty was administrative. Aunt Lorraine, I didn't want to do this today. But the deed is legal. Uncle Earl signed it in September. I have the notary's stamp. You can take what you need tonight, but I'd appreciate it if you were out by Monday. She stared at the signature. It looked like Earl's. It was shaky, but Earl's handwriting had been shaky since the diagnosis. She said, "He never told me," Vernon said. "He didn't tell you a lot of things." The locksmith would not look at her. He kept his head down, the drill whining, the old tumbler coming loose in his hand. The casserole dish was still warm in the passenger seat of her car. The reading glasses were in her coat pocket, and Lorraine Mosby, 63 years old, standing on her own porch in her funeral dress, watched a stranger change the tumblers on a door she had walked through 19,000 times. She did not yell. She did not call the police. She stood there until the locksmith finished, and then she sat in her car, and then she drove away. She believed in that moment that Earl had chosen Vernon, that the signature was real, that 41 years of marriage had ended with a quitclaim deed and a locksmith, and that she had been, in some quiet way she had never understood, not enough. She spent the first night in her car, a 2009 Honda Civic, with 174,000 miles on it, parked in the lot behind the First Baptist Church. She did not sleep. She ate half of the casserole at 11 at night, using a plastic fork she found in the glove box, and she put Earl's reading glasses on the dashboard and looked at them until the windshield fogged over from her breathing. The math of her survival was very specific and very small. $211.14 in her checking account, because the last Social Security deposit had been Earl's, and it would not come again. Her own Social Security, $1,044 a month, but the next check was 19 days away. She had no credit card. Earl had handled the finances. She did not know the password to their joint savings account, and when she called the bank on Saturday morning from the church parking lot, they told her the account had been closed 2 weeks prior, withdrawn in person. She did not ask by whom. Gas in the Civic, 3/4 of a tank. She drove as little as possible. She ate at the Donna menu of the McDonald's on Route 7, a McChicken sandwich and a small coffee, $3.47 with tax, once a day. She allowed herself this. She kept the receipts in the cup holder, a small column of white paper that grew by one each afternoon. On the third night, parked behind the church, she heard scratching at the passenger door. A stray tabby, orange and white, thin, with a notch in its left ear. She opened the door because she could not think of a reason not to. The cat climbed in, curled on the passenger seat, and stayed. She named it Duchess, because Earl had always said his mother carried herself like royalty, and this cat had the same way of sitting perfectly still and expecting the world to adjust. On Sunday she walked past the Kroger and saw a birthday cake in the case. Buttercream roses piped in a shade of pink that was slightly wrong. Too much red. She knew it was wrong the way a retired carpenter knows a door frame is off. She had decorated cakes for 18 years at the bakery on Broad Street in Chillicothe, before the arthritis in her knuckles made a piping bag feel like a fistful of broken glass. She looked at the cake and kept walking. It was not useful information. On Monday, the 4th day, she went to the county clerk's office. She went to challenge the quitclaim deed, because she had spent Sunday night reading about property transfers on her phone in the church parking lot, until the battery dropped to 9%. The clerk, a woman named Dana with reading glasses on a beaded chain, pulled up the records for the Elm Ridge Road house. The deed transfer was there. Earl Mosby to Vernon Mosby, September 14th, notarized. Legal on its face, but Dana frowned. "There's something else here," she said. "Under Earl Mosby. There's a second property." Lorraine had no idea what she was talking about. It was a commercial parcel at 114 Dock Street. A bakery. Purchased at a county tax auction on March 3, 2001, for $1, with a lien clearance payment plan of $3,400 in back taxes paid over 6 years. Title held in a revocable trust, with one named beneficiary. Lorraine Mosby. She had never heard of this property. She had never heard of this trust. Dana was matter-of-fact about it. "Looks like he paid the last installment in 07. It's been clear and free since then. You're the sole trustee and beneficiary. He never transferred it, never lioned it, never told anyone about it as far as I can see." The building had been Earl's mother's bakery, Mosby's, on Dock Street, where his mother Opal had baked sourdough and butter rolls, and 3-layer cakes for 26 years until she died in 1997, and the shop closed and no one in the family wanted it. Lorraine had been to that bakery. She had been there on her 3rd date with Earl, in 1982, when Opal gave her a slice of chess pie and looked at her for a long time and said, "You have good hands." She had not thought about that bakery in years. Dana slid a printout across the counter. "You want the address?" Lorraine took it. She sat in the Civic in the county clerk's parking lot for 11 minutes, with the paper on her lap and Duchess asleep on the passenger seat. Then she started the engine. She did not know what she would find at 114 Dock Street, but she knew that Earl had bought his mother's bakery in secret, paid off the taxes over 6 years, put it in a trust in her name, and never said a word. Not in 22 years of marriage after the purchase, not during the months of his illness, not in the last conversation they ever had. And she wanted to know why. 114 Dock Street sat at the end of a block of 3 commercial storefronts, 2 blocks from the river. The building to its left was a closed insurance office. The building to its right was a laundromat that appeared to operate on the honor system. Dock Street itself was cracked asphalt and leaf mulch, and the particular silence of a town that once had a purpose and was still deciding whether it had another one. The bakery was brick, old orange-brown river brick from the 1940s, the kind that darkens when it rains. The plate glass front window was intact, but fogged from the inside with 22 years of calcium and dust. The awning, once striped green and white, had collapsed on its left side, one aluminum arm bent down like a broken wing. Lorraine stood on the sidewalk with the brass key Dana had given her, a copy from the trust file, and looked at the building the way you look at a place that holds someone else's memory, but none of your own. She turned the key. The door opened stiffly, scraping against a floor that had warped from moisture. Inside, flour dust. Everywhere. A fine pale layer on every surface, as though the room had been exhaling for 2 decades and never inhaled. The smell was damp plaster and old wood, and something faintly sweet beneath it. The ghost of yeast, or sugar, or both. A Hobart commercial mixer, model A200, bolted to a stainless steel table in the center of the kitchen, rusted at the base. The bowl was still attached, and inside the bowl was a family of mouse nests made from shredded wax paper. A bread oven, a Blodgett deck oven, 2 chambers, fire-brick lining, sitting against the back wall like a cast-iron altar. Cold. The door handle had a patina of green oxidation. A walk-in freezer, its door sealed shut with a padlock that had rusted into a single solid mass of orange metal. The compressor unit on top was silent and dead. A glass display case at the front, cracked in one corner, still holding 3 ceramic cake stands, each one empty, each one perfectly centered. Ceiling tiles stained brown from old water damage. One had fallen and lay on the floor like a dropped playing card. A man walking a dog on the opposite sidewalk paused, looked at Lorraine standing in the doorway, and kept walking. Nobody had asked about this building in 22 years. Its reopening was not an event. It was barely a fact. She stepped inside. Duchess followed, slipping between her ankles and immediately investigating the proofing cabinet, a tall stainless steel box on wheels, its door ajar. The cat climbed inside and sat down. Lorraine almost smiled. It was the first time her face had moved that way in 5 days. She walked the space slowly, the way you walk through a house that is not yet yours. The front room, the old customer area, was 12 feet deep. The kitchen behind it was twice that. There was a narrow hallway in the back, leading to a bathroom with a cracked toilet and an intact sink, and a closet-sized office with a metal desk and a chair with a split vinyl seat. Everything was exactly what you would expect from a bakery that had been closed since 1999. Dust, rust, mouse damage, water stains, except one thing. The Hobart mixer was rusted in place, bolted down immovable, a 300-pound monument to neglect. But the table it sat on was not. The stainless steel table had been moved. She could see it in the floor, 4 divots where the original legs had stood, and 4 current legs sitting 2 inches south of those divots. Someone had moved that table, mixer and all, and then moved it back. The effort required to do that would have been enormous. Earl had been a strong man, but not a young one. She could have ignored it. The table's position was irrelevant to anything practical. She was 63 years old. She was effectively homeless, and she had come here to see whether the building was worth enough to sell for first and last on an apartment. But the divots bothered her. Earl had been an electrician. He measured everything. He would never have moved a 300-pound table 2 inches by accident. She tried to push the table. It did not move. She tried harder. It moved 1/4 of an inch, metal legs shrieking against tile. Duchess bolted out of the proofing cabinet and stared at her from under the display case. Lorraine pushed again. The table moved 6 inches, then a foot, then enough. Behind where the mixer had stood, flat on the floor, flush against the baseboard, was a tin. A large, round, commercial flour tin. The kind bakeries bought in the 1990s, plain steel with a snap-on lid, and it had been pushed against the wall and covered by the table's shadow for what looked like years. But it was clean, not dusty, not rusted. Someone had sealed it with electrical tape, black electrical tape, wrapped tight around the seam of the lid, and written on the top, in permanent marker, in handwriting she recognized. Lorraine. She did not open it immediately. She sat on the floor beside it, her back against the wall, and she looked at her name in her dead husband's handwriting. And she pressed her thumb against the R the way you press your thumb against a bruise, to make sure it still hurts. Then she peeled the electrical tape. She pried the lid. Inside, a stack of paper wrapped in a Ziploc bag. She pulled it out. 14 savings bonds. United States Series EE bonds, purchased from the Treasury between 1998 and 2012. Face values ranging from $200 to $1,000. Each one had her name listed as co-owner or beneficiary. Each one was in a separate paper sleeve, and on each sleeve Earl had written the date he purchased it. The dates were all the same, November 16th, her birthday. Beneath the bonds, folded in half, was a single index card. On it, in Earl's handwriting, Lorraine, if you're reading Mama's cards, you already came to the right place. Don't sell the mixer. Look behind it. She had already looked behind it. She had found this. But the note said, Mama's cards, plural. She turned the card over. On the back, in the same steady hand, these are yours. I bought one every year on your birthday. I know you never liked surprises, but I couldn't figure out another way to keep them safe from Vernon. Keep them safe from Vernon. Earl had known. He had known what Vernon would do, maybe not the exact method, maybe not the funeral day timing, but the shape of it. He had known, and he had not told her. And instead, he had done this. 1 bond a year, hidden in a flour tin, behind a 300-pound mixer, in a bakery she did not know he owned. If he hid this here, what else did he hide? The note said Mama's cards. She looked around the kitchen. Opal Mosby's recipe cards. She had seen a tin recipe card box on the shelf above the bread oven when she walked in. She had assumed it was empty. It was not empty. She reached for the box. It was heavier than a box of recipe cards should be. Something shifted inside it when she tilted it. Not paper sliding, but something denser. Something with weight. She opened it. Inside were recipe cards. 40 or 50 of them, handwritten in Opal Mosby's careful cursive, stained with butter and vanilla extract, and the particular amber of aged paper. But tucked between the cards, interspersed like bookmarks, were notes. Earl's handwriting. Smaller, cramped. Some of them were not notes at all. They were entries, dated, with numbers. It was going to take her hours to read them. She sat on the floor of her dead mother-in-law's bakery, with a cat in the proofing cabinet, and 14 savings bonds in her lap, and a box of secrets in her hands, and she began. The savings bonds alone changed the math of her survival. She did not know their exact matured value. Series EE bonds purchased between 1998 and 2012 would have varied in interest rate, and some had reached final maturity, while others were still accruing. But she knew enough to know that 14 bonds, with face values totaling $7,000, were worth more than $7,000, and that more was the difference between sleeping in the Civic and not. She set them aside. She would take them to a bank. But first, the recipe cards. Opal Mosby's recipe collection was organized by category: breads, cakes, pies, cookies, icings, holiday specials. Each card was handwritten in blue ink, the measurements precise, the instructions terse in the way of women who cooked by feel and wrote down recipes only because someone asked. The sourdough starter card had a grease stain in the shape of a thumbprint. The buttercream card smelled, faintly and impossibly, like vanilla. Between the cards, Earl had tucked his own notes. They were written on scraps of paper, on the backs of receipts, on post-it notes that had lost their adhesive and were held in place by the pressure of the cards around them. They were dated. They spanned 22 years. On the buttercream recipe card, in the margin, Earl had written, "You always said my mama's buttercream was the only thing worth crying over. I hope you're not crying now, but if you are, keep going. There is more." The notes, when she laid them out on the bakery counter in chronological order, told a story. In 2001, bought the building, $1 plus back taxes. Trust filed with county. L doesn't know yet, not time. In 2003, tax installment number 3, $567. Took it from overtime. In 2005, roof leak. Fixed it myself. Didn't tell anyone I was here. In 2007, final tax installment paid. Building is free and clear. L's name is on everything. In 2009, paid off the second mortgage on Elm Ridge. Bank has the record. Vernon keeps asking about the equity. Let him ask. In 2011, started the policy. MetLife, $50,000. L is beneficiary. Agent asked why not leave it with the will. Told him I didn't trust the will. In 2014, Vernon brought a lawyer to Thanksgiving. Talked about estate planning. I smiled and passed the potatoes. In 2018, Elle's arthritis getting worse. Watched her try to open a jar last night. She used to pipe 6 dozen roses before lunch. This is not fair. But she doesn't complain. She never complains. In 2022, diagnosis. 7 months, they say. I have 7 months to finish this. She read them in order, sitting on the bakery floor, her back against the bread oven, the light through the clouded front window turning from afternoon gold to evening grey. She had lived with this man for 41 years. She had slept beside him, eaten across from him, argued about the thermostat and the grocery list, and whether the gutters needed cleaning. She had known him, or believed she had. And here, in his mother's recipe cards, was the shadow of a second Earl, a man who had been quietly, methodically, for 25 years, building a wall between his wife and the thing he knew was coming. She had believed, 4 days ago on her own porch, that he had chosen Vernon, that the quitclaim deed was the truth. She was beginning to understand that the quitclaim deed might be the lie, and the flour tin might be the truth, and that Earl Mosby had been a more careful man than she or anyone else had ever given him credit for. He wrote, "I didn't trust the will." She kept turning that sentence over, and if he hid the bonds here, and the insurance policy was not in the house, and the second mortgage was paid off secretly, where was the deed? She looked at the bread oven. Earl's 2022 entry said, 7 months to finish this. The most recent notes were tucked not between recipe cards, but inside the oven's top chamber, where she had not yet looked. The next morning, Tuesday the 6th day since the funeral, she returned to the bakery at 7 in the morning with a flashlight and a McDonald's coffee, and Duchess in the passenger seat. She had not slept. She had spent the night in the Civic, parked behind the bakery this time, reading Earl's notes by the dome light until her phone died, and then sitting in the dark, turning the reading glasses over in her hands. The bread oven had 2 chambers, top and bottom, each with a cast-iron door. She opened the top chamber. Inside, behind a removable baffle plate that directed airflow, was a space about the size of a shoebox. In that space was a composition notebook, black and white marbled cover, the kind sold at any dollar store, and a manila envelope. The notebook was the ledger, not the scraps and post-it notes from the recipe box. This was the formal record, written in Earl's deliberate hand. Every entry dated, every dollar accounted for. Every bond purchase, date, serial number, face value. Every tax installment on the bakery, with receipt numbers. The second mortgage on Elm Ridge Road. Original amount, $34,000. Taken out in 2004 to replace the roof and furnace. Monthly payments. And the final payoff in August 2009. Earl had paid it from a separate account Lorraine did not know about, funded by his side electrical work. The life insurance policy. Metropolitan Life, initiated March 2011. $50,000 death benefit, annual premium of $1,740, paid through 2023. Inside the back cover of the ledger, penciled in Earl's hand, I paid off the second mortgage in '09. The bank has the record. Vernon doesn't know. He thinks the house is leveraged, and I never corrected him. And tucked between the ledger's pages, a separate slip of paper. I started a policy in 2011. Metropolitan Life, policy number on the next page. You are the sole beneficiary. I told the agent my wife was tougher than I was, and he laughed. But I meant it. The manila envelope contained a copy of the Metropolitan Life policy, with Lorraine listed as sole beneficiary. A letter from the insurance company confirming the policy was active, and premiums paid through October 2023. And a handwritten note from Earl. Call the number on the letterhead. Give them the policy number. They will walk you through the claim. Do not let Vernon contact them. He is not on this policy, and he has no right to it. This was not a man who had forgotten his wife. This was a man who had spent 12 years paying premiums on a policy hidden in a bread oven, because he believed, correctly, that any document left in the house would be found by Vernon before it could be found by Lorraine. The second mortgage detail was equally pointed. Vernon, an appraiser, would have assessed the house's value against its liabilities. If he believed the house still carried $34,000 in mortgage debt, the equity would look lower, the property less worth fighting for. Unless Vernon was not interested in the equity at all, but in the flip value in a rising market, which, of course, is exactly what he was interested in. Lorraine could have taken the bonds, filed the insurance claim, and walked away. The bakery had served its purpose. It was a safety deposit box built of brick and flour dust, and she could sell it and add the proceeds to the bonds and the insurance and have enough to start over. But she did not, because the ledger's final entry, December 2022, said, "One more thing to do. The oven, bottom chamber." When the time comes, she had only checked the top chamber. The bottom chamber of a Blodgett deck oven is lined with fire brick. Dense, heat-retaining bricks, set without mortar in a herringbone pattern. They are designed to be replaceable. After decades of use, individual bricks crack and can be slid out and swapped. A baker would know this. An electrician who had spent hours in this kitchen as a boy, watching his mother bake, would also know this. Lorraine opened the bottom chamber door. The fire bricks looked undisturbed, the same sooty orange-grey surface as the rest of the oven. But she was looking now with different eyes. She was looking the way Earl had apparently wanted her to look. Slowly, and from the ground up. The third brick from the left, second row, had a hairline mark along its edge that was not a crack. It was a cut, made with a masonry blade, she guessed, because Earl owned the masonry blade, and she had seen it in the garage 100 times without ever asking what he used it for. She pulled the brick out. It resisted, then slid free with a gritty whisper. Behind it was a space, not large, perhaps 4 inches deep, carved or chipped into the surrounding fire brick to create a pocket. Inside the pocket was a document, rolled tight and wrapped in plastic sheeting, sealed with more of Earl's black electrical tape. She unwrapped it. It was a deed. A warranty deed for the property at 47 Elm Ridge Road, their house, filed with the county recorder's office in 2003, establishing a revocable trust with Earl Mosby as grantor and Lorraine Mosby as sole beneficiary. The trust predated the quitclaim deed Vernon had produced by 20 years. Scratched into the mortar behind where the fire brick had sat, visible only when the brick was removed, were Earl's words, "The deed is here. The house is yours. It was always yours. I just had to make sure nobody could take it before you found this." She held the deed in one hand and the brick in the other, and she sat on the floor, and she did cry then. Not the numb, airless grief of the funeral, but a different kind of crying. The kind that comes when you realize you have been wrong about the person you were angriest at. A revocable trust established in 2003 placed the property outside of probate. It could not be transferred by a quitclaim deed signed by the grantor unless the trust was first revoked, and there was no record of revocation. Vernon's quitclaim deed was signed in September 2023, when Earl was on hospice, on morphine, in the final weeks. The signature was likely obtained under duress, or at minimum under conditions of diminished capacity. The trust deed in Lorraine's hands was the superior instrument, filed 20 years earlier when Earl was competent and deliberate. Vernon's document was not just cruel, it was, in all likelihood, void. She could have gone to the courthouse that afternoon. She could have filed a challenge, hired a lawyer, started the process. But she did not. Not yet, because there was still the cassette tape. She had found it 2 hours earlier, while cleaning the walk-in freezer. The padlock had finally yielded to a hacksaw she bought at the hardware store for $11, the most deliberate purchase she had made in a week. Inside the freezer, which was dry and dark and smelled like nothing at all, because the cold had killed every scent decades ago, she found the compressor housing the mechanical unit at the top of the freezer's interior. Earl, the electrician, had removed the service panel. Inside, taped to the interior wall of the housing, was a plastic bag containing a single cassette tape. On the case, in Earl's handwriting, "Play this last. E." If Lorraine's story has you sitting a little closer to the screen right now, if you are thinking about the people in your own life who said things with actions instead of words, I would be grateful if you took a second and subscribed to this channel. We tell stories like this one every week, and the next chapter of Lorraine's is the one that almost broke her. She did not play the tape. She held it in her hands, a standard Maxell UR90, the kind you could buy at any drugstore until a few years ago, and she turned it over. The tape was intact. The label said, "Play this last," nothing else. She did not own a cassette player. Earl had owned one, a boombox he kept in the garage for ball games. But the garage was inside the house, and the house was behind Vernon's new locks. She put the tape in her coat pocket, next to the reading glasses. She had been carrying the glasses for 6 days. Now she was carrying his voice too, and she could not hear it. Earl had designed this. He had not left a single packet in a single location. He had left a trail, flour tin to recipe cards, to ledger to oven to freezer, and he had ended it with a tape that required a machine to play, because he wanted her to pause. He wanted her to sit with what she had found before she heard what he had to say. It was, she realized, the most Earl thing Earl had ever done. He was a man who believed in the pause before the answer. He had once spent 45 minutes reading the instructions for a toaster he already knew how to use, because, he said, the people who wrote this wanted me to read it, and I owe them that. She owed him this. She would play the tape, but not yet. She decided, on the floor of the bakery, with the deed and the bonds and the ledger and the tape and Duchess watching her from the proofing cabinet, that she was going to do 2 things. First, she was going to challenge Vernon's quitclaim deed with the trust document she had found behind the firebrick. Second, she was going to reopen this bakery, not because of the money, the bonds and the insurance and the house. That was Earl keeping her safe. The bakery was something else. The bakery was Earl asking her to come back to life. She did not play the tape, but she already knew what it would say, in the way that 41 years of marriage teaches you the rhythm of a person's voice, even when you cannot hear the words. What she did not know, what she could not have known, was that Vernon had already begun asking questions about 114 Dock Street. Vernon Mosby was not a stupid man. He was a real estate appraiser, licensed, experienced, thorough. His job was to know what things were worth and who owned them. He had known about the bakery, not its contents. Earl had hidden those too well, but he had known about the building itself. County records were public. Vernon had pulled them before the funeral, as part of what he would later describe to his attorney as due diligence on Uncle Earl's estate. He had seen the trust. He had noted the bakery's assessed value, low because it had been vacant for 22 years, and he had filed it away as a secondary target, less important than the house, but still worth pursuing once the house was secured. What Vernon had not expected was for Lorraine to find the bakery first. He found out on a Thursday, 11 days after the funeral, when a colleague mentioned seeing an older woman unlocking the door of the building on Dock Street. Mosby's, the colleague said, didn't know that was still in the family. Vernon drove past the bakery that afternoon. The lights were on. Through the clouded window he could see movement. Someone sweeping. The awning had been propped up. A car was parked in the alley. A Honda Civic he recognized. He pulled over. He did not go in. He sat in his car for 6 minutes and then drove to his attorney's office. Vernon's interest in the property was not abstract greed. It was leveraged. He had borrowed $40,000 against the anticipated equity of the Elm Ridge house to fund a down payment on a rental property in Columbus. The loan was contingent on him closing the flip within 90 days. If the quitclaim deed was voided, the Elm Ridge house reverted to Lorraine's trust. His collateral evaporated, and he would owe $40,000 to a private lender with an 8% rate and a reputation for aggressive collection. Vernon was not stealing from Lorraine because he was evil. He was stealing from her because he had already spent the money. Vernon's attorney filed 2 actions in the county probate court within a week. The first was a petition to void the 2003 trust. The argument that Earl Mosby had established the revocable trust without informing his closest living relatives, and that the trust should be voided on the grounds that it was created to defraud potential heirs of their rightful inheritance. This was a weak argument, because revocable trusts do not require notification of non-beneficiary relatives, but it was enough to trigger a hearing and a temporary hold on the trust assets until the court could rule. The second was a motion to affirm the quitclaim deed. The argument that Earl had signed the deed voluntarily, that it was notarized, and that it represented his final and most recent intent regarding the Elm Ridge property. The motion asked the court to declare the quitclaim deed the controlling instrument, and to order Lorraine to vacate any claim to the property. The effect on Lorraine was immediate and specific. She could not sell the bonds until the trust status was resolved, because the bonds were in the trust and the court's hold froze all trust assets. She could not file the insurance claim without proof of identity and a permanent address, and her permanent address was, on paper, the Elm Ridge house she could not enter. She could not sell or mortgage the bakery, also a trust asset, also frozen. The hearing was scheduled for December 14th, 47 days away. She had $211 in her checking account, minus the 11 for the hacksaw, minus 10 days of McChicken sandwiches at $3.47 each, $165.44 remaining. Her Social Security check had arrived and would keep her fed and fueled for the month, but she could not afford an attorney. Vernon's strategy was not to win. His argument was procedurally valid, but substantively thin, because the trust had been filed 20 years ago, when Earl was in his 40s and manifestly competent. The strategy was to delay, to bleed, to force Lorraine into a settlement where she traded the house for the bakery, and he walked away with the flip. He came to the bakery on a Saturday afternoon, 18 days after the funeral. Lorraine was inside cleaning the bread oven, her hands grey with ash. Duchess was on the counter. Vernon stood in the doorway. He was wearing a sport coat. He did not come in. "Aunt Lorraine, I want to make this easy." She did not look at him. "You keep this building. You keep whatever's inside it. I keep the house. We both walk away. No court, no lawyers, no hard feelings." She said Earl put the house in my name 20 years ago. Vernon said, and he signed it over to me 6 weeks before he died. "People change their minds." She said, "He was on morphine, Vernon." Vernon said, "He was on morphine and he still knew my name, and he still signed his own name and the notary didn't see a problem." She looked at him then. "Get out of my bakery." He left. He did not come back, but his attorney filed a third motion the following Monday, a request for an expedited asset valuation of 114 Dock Street, arguing that the bakery's commercial equipment might constitute trust assets subject to the freeze, and that Lorraine's presence in the building constituted unauthorized use of disputed property. The third motion was the one that nearly broke her. If the court granted it, she could be ordered to leave the bakery. The building she had been sleeping in, not the car anymore, because the bakery had a working radiator and a bathroom with running water and a door that locked, could be taken away the same way the house had been. She sat in the bakery's office, at Earl's metal desk, with the ledger open in front of her and the cassette tape on the desk beside it, and she did the math of her life on the back of a receipt. She had $1,044 a month in Social Security. She had no attorney, she had no family except Vernon, and Vernon was suing her. She had Duchess. She had a building that might be taken from her in 40 days. She had a cassette tape she could not play. She considered giving up. Not in a dramatic way. Lorraine Mosby was not a dramatic woman. She considered it in the way that exhausted people consider it, as a settling, a sinking, a decision to stop pushing against a current that was always going to win. It was Duchess who interrupted this. The cat knocked the cassette tape off the desk with her paw, and it clattered on the tile floor, and Lorraine bent to pick it up, and when she straightened, her eyes fell on the recipe card box still sitting on the counter. She looked at the recipe cards. She looked at the Hobart mixer, still bolted to the table, still rusted. She looked at the bread oven. She looked at the display case with its 3 empty ceramic stands. She was a baker. She had been a baker for 18 years. Her hands hurt, but her hands had always hurt, and she had piped 6 dozen roses before lunch with hands that hurt, because the roses did not care about her hands, and neither did the people whose daughters were getting married on Saturday. She knew commercial baking equipment. She knew supply chains. She knew what a working bakery needed and what it was worth. And she knew, because Earl's ledger had told her, that this building was free and clear, that its commercial kitchen was intact beneath the rust, and that its assessed value was artificially low because no one had operated it in 2 decades. She went to the county legal aid office the next morning. She brought the ledger, the trust deed, photographs of the savings bonds, and the quitclaim deed Vernon had taped to her storm door. The intake attorney was a woman named Patricia Sue Juan, 41, overworked, skeptical. She looked at the documents. She looked at Lorraine. She said, "How long have you been sleeping in the bakery?" 12 days. "And the quitclaim deed was signed when your husband was on hospice?" 6 weeks before he died. He was on 60 milligrams of morphine twice a day. Patricia closed the folder. "I'm going to take this case." She took it in part because the legal merits were strong. A 20-year trust versus a morphine-era quitclaim deed was not a close call. But she also took it because Lorraine, in explaining the bakery, had inadvertently demonstrated something. She understood commercial property. She could articulate the building's value, its equipment inventory, its zoning classification, its potential revenue as a working bakery. She was not a helpless widow who needed rescuing. She was a professional who had been robbed, and she knew exactly what had been taken. Patricia filed a counter-motion within a week to dissolve the asset freeze on the grounds that the trust was validly established, to void the quitclaim deed on the grounds of diminished capacity and undue influence, and to order Vernon to pay Lorraine's legal costs if the court found the original petition to be frivolous. The hearing was still 6 weeks away, but for the first time in 3 weeks, Lorraine had an attorney, a counterfiling, and a reason to believe that the current was not, in fact, always going to win. In the meantime, she had one more thing to do. She had found a cassette player at the Goodwill on Route 7, a Sony boombox, scratched and battered, $4.99. She brought it to the bakery, plugged it in, and set it on the counter beside the tape. She did not press play, not yet. She cleaned the bakery for 3 more hours first, scrubbing the display case, oiling the Hobart's gears, sweeping the floor until it shone. She wanted the bakery to be ready. She could not have explained why, but she wanted Earl to hear her working when she played his voice. At 6:47 in the evening, with Duchess asleep in the proofing cabinet and the bakery smelling of lemon cleaner and old brick, she pressed play. The tape hissed for 4 seconds. The blank leader, the rum-up, and then Earl's voice filled the bakery. It was his voice, not the voice from the last months, thin, medicated, fading, but his real voice, the one she had heard across 41 years of kitchen tables and car rides and arguments about the thermostat. A baritone with a rasp at the edges, The voice of a man who had smoked in his 20s and quit in his 30s and never fully lost the gravel. Lorraine, it's me. I'm recording this on the Tuesday after my diagnosis. I don't have as much time as I thought, so I'm going to say things I should have said at the kitchen table. A pause on the tape. She could hear him breathing. She could hear, faintly, the sound of a furnace running. He had recorded this at home, probably in the garage, probably on the boombox she had never thought to look for. You decorated cakes for other people's happiest days for 18 years, and you never once complained when your hands started hurting. I watched you, Lorraine. I watched you every single day, and I never told you that you were the bravest person I knew. I'm telling you now. She was standing at the counter. She put her hands flat on the stainless steel because she needed to be touching something solid. His voice continued. He talked about Vernon, briefly, without bitterness, with the exhaustion of a man who had seen the problem coming for decades and had simply worked around it instead of confronting it. He said, "Vernon is going to try. You know that. He has been trying since your mother-in-law's funeral. I have done everything I can think of to make sure he fails. But I cannot do it from where I am going, so you will have to finish it." He talked about the bakery. He talked about his mother, Opal, and how she had stood at that same counter for 26 years and never made a loaf she was ashamed of. He said he bought the building because he could not stand to see it become a storage unit or a vape shop, and because he knew, the way you know things about a person you have watched for 4 decades, that Lorraine would need a place to go, and that the place she needed was a kitchen. Everything in this building is yours. The bonds, the deed, the policy, it's all yours. But the bakery is the real thing I'm leaving you. Not because of the money. Because you always came alive in a kitchen, and I think you stopped letting yourself. Open it back up, Lorraine. That's the last thing I'll ever ask you. The tape ran on for another 8 seconds. The sound of Earl setting down the recorder. The faint click of the stop button. And then silence. She stood in the bakery with his voice still in the room, and she pressed rewind, and she played it again. And then she pressed rewind, and she played it a 3rd time, because 41 years was not enough time to hear everything a person had to say, and 30 minutes on a cassette tape was not enough either. But it was what she had. The hearing was on December 14th. Patricia Sue 1 arrived with 4 filed documents. The original trust deed from 2003, the county recorder's certification, a sworn statement from Earl's hospice nurse confirming the morphine dosage at the time the quitclaim deed was signed, and a copy of the Metropolitan Life Insurance policy showing that Earl had designated Lorraine, not Vernon, as the beneficiary of every financial instrument he had created in the last 22 years. Vernon's attorney asked for a continuance. The judge denied it. The proceedings lasted 90 minutes. The key finding, the revocable trust, established in 2003 and never revoked, was the controlling instrument. The quitclaim deed, signed on September 14, 2023, was void. Not merely voidable, but void. Because the trust's existence meant the property had been held outside of Earl's individual estate since 2003, and could not be transferred by a simple quitclaim without first dissolving the trust, which had never been done. Vernon's attorney argued that Earl's intent had changed. The judge asked for evidence of revocation. There was none. The quitclaim deed was voided. The house at 47 Elm Ridge Road was confirmed as Lorraine's under the trust. The asset freeze was lifted. Vernon was ordered to pay Lorraine's legal fees, $3,200, and the court referred the matter of the quitclaim deed to the county prosecutor for investigation of potential elder exploitation. Vernon sat in the courtroom with his sport coat and his phone, and his face the color of old drywall. Lorraine did not look at him. She was not interested in his face. She was interested in the piece of paper Patricia handed her as they walked out of the courthouse. A certified copy of the court order, confirming that the house was hers, the bakery was hers, and the trust assets were released. Dana, the county clerk, was waiting in the hallway. She had come on her lunch break. She said, "I'm glad, Mrs. Mosby." And then, "My daughter needs a birthday cake for Saturday. Do you still take orders?" Lorraine almost laughed. "I don't have a working oven yet," Dana said. when you do. There was no gloating. There was no scene where Vernon was publicly humiliated. He was simply emptied of leverage. The thing he stole was returned, the mechanism he used was voided, and the law moved on. Lorraine moved on first. She went back to the bakery that evening. She unlocked the door, her building, her name on the trust, and the sign and the recipe cards inside. She stood at the counter where Opal Mosby had shaped loaves for 26 years, and where Earl Mosby had hidden 25 years of preparations in flour tins and fire bricks and a freezer compressor. And she set down the court order beside the Hobart mixer. Then she opened the ledger to the last page. Earl's final entry, dated December 2022. One more thing to do. The oven, bottom chamber, when the time comes. He had finished. He had done everything he set out to do, and he had finished with 7 months to spare, and then he had died, and the plan had worked. The bonds, when she took them to the bank the following Monday, had a combined matured value of $14,200. The insurance claim, filed with Metropolitan Life on December 16th, paid $50,000 within 30 days. The house on Elm Ridge Road appraised at $187,000, free and clear, no mortgage, no lien. The bakery building, with its commercial zoning and intact equipment, was assessed at $40,000, though Patricia's appraiser suggested it could be worth more once operational. She had been, 9 weeks earlier, a woman with $211 in her checking account and a pair of broken reading glasses. The distance between those numbers was not measured in dollars. It was measured in flour tins and fire bricks and a cassette tape that still sat on the bakery counter because she was not ready to put it away. She did not deposit all of the money. She deposited enough to live, enough to pay the utility reconnection on the bakery, to order flour and sugar and yeast, to buy a new set of piping tips because her old ones were in the house, and she did not want to go back to the house yet. She wanted to earn the house again, the way Earl had earned the bakery, slowly, one payment at a time, with her hands. She filled the Hobart's bowl. She mixed a batch of sourdough from Opal's recipe card, the one with the thumbprint grease stain, and she set it to proof in the cabinet where Duchess liked to sleep. The cat watched her from the counter, unimpressed, as cats are. Her hands hurt. They had hurt for years. She piped a test rose on a sheet of wax paper. Buttercream, Opal's recipe, the vanilla one, and it was not perfect. The lines were thicker than they used to be. The leafwork trembled, but it held. Mosby's reopened on the second Saturday of January. Not as a full bakery. Not yet. The Hobart mixer worked because Lorraine had spent 3 days with a wire brush and food-grade oil restoring its gears, and an electrician from the county co-op had rewired the motor as a favor after Patricia mentioned the case to him. The bread oven worked because Earl, of course, had maintained its gas line during his secret visits over the years, and the gas company needed only to turn the valve. The display case was cleaned. The ceramic cake stands were filled. Sourdough on the left, buttercream rolls in the center, a chess pie on the right. Opal's chess pie, from the recipe card with the coffee ring. 23 people came on opening day. Dana brought her daughter. The mailman stopped in because he smelled bread from the sidewalk. A woman Lorraine did not know stood at the counter for a long time, looking at the chess pie, and finally said, "My grandmother used to buy this pie here. I thought this place was gone." By February, Mosby's was open 4 days a week. By March, Lorraine had hired her first employee, a woman named Georgia, 57, recently divorced, who had been a line cook for 30 years and could not find work because, as she told Lorraine at the interview, nobody hires a 57-year-old woman whose knees sound like a bag of marbles. Lorraine hired her on the spot. By April, she had hired 3 more women. All of them were over 50. All of them had been displaced by divorce, by layoffs, by the slow erosion of a town that had been losing industries for 40 years. Lorraine trained them on Opal's recipes, and she taught them to pipe roses, and when their hands were unsteady, she told them what she had learned from 18 years of piping and 9 weeks of grief. Steady is a decision. You decide your hand is steady, and then it is. She formalized it by June. The county small business office helped her file the paperwork for a workforce training kitchen, a designation that allowed her to receive a modest state grant and offer a certification in commercial baking to women over 50 who were re-entering the workforce. The grant was $12,000 a year. It was not a fortune. It was enough for flour and insurance and a second oven, and it meant that the bakery was no longer just a bakery. It was the thing Earl had seen when he looked at his wife across the kitchen table for 41 years. A woman who came alive in a kitchen, and who could bring other people to life in one too. By the end of the first year, Mosby's had trained 11 women. 7 of them found employment in bakeries, catering companies, or school kitchens within 3 months of completing the program. The bakery itself was profitable, modestly, not dramatically. Lorraine paid herself $2,200 a month and put the rest back into the building. The house on Elm Ridge Road she rented to a young couple with a baby. She did not want to live there. She lived in the apartment above the bakery. 2 rooms and a bathroom, which she had cleaned and furnished with a bed from the Goodwill, and a table from the house and Earl's reading glasses on the nightstand. On a morning in November, a year and 12 days after Earl's funeral, Lorraine stood behind the counter of Mosby's at 5:30 in the morning, shaping sourdough loaves, her hands dusted white, the bread oven warming the room to a temperature that made the windows fog. Duchess was asleep on the shelf above the mixer, in the exact spot where the recipe card box had been. The box was now in the display case, behind glass, next to a framed photograph of Opal Mosby, standing in this same kitchen in 1989, arms crossed, apron on, looking directly into the camera with the expression of a woman who expected the world to adjust. Lorraine took Earl's reading glasses from her apron pocket. She still carried them, every day, the tortoiseshell frames and the cracked left lens, and she set them on the counter beside the sourdough. She did this every morning. She baked beside them, and when the first customer came through the door, she put them back in her pocket. It was not sentiment, exactly. It was not grief. It was the same impulse that made her check the roses on every birthday cake. A quality control habit for love, a way of making sure the thing was still there. She had played the cassette tape 41 times. She knew this because she kept a tally on the inside of the tape's case. 1 mark for each play. 41 marks. 1 for each year of marriage. She had decided, without telling anyone, that she would stop at 41 and let the tape rest. The voice was hers now. She did not need the machine. The first loaf came out of the oven at 6:15. She set it on the cooling rack beside the reading glasses, and the steam rose between the bread and the glass. And for a moment, just a moment, the glasses fogged the way they used to fog when Earl stood over a pot of soup on a Sunday evening, and she told him to take them off before they slipped into the broth. He never did. He liked seeing the world through steam, he said. He said it made everything look like it was just about to become clear. She wiped the glasses with her apron. She shaped the next loaf. Outside, the river town was waking up. The laundromat next door had turned on its lights. A car passed on Dock Street, the sign above the door, repainted in October, green letters on a white background, the apostrophe restored, read MOSBs, and it was legible from 3 blocks away. The oven was warm, the bread was rising. And Lorraine Mosby, her hands dusted white, her husband's cracked glasses in her pocket, was already shaping the next loaf before the first one had cooled.